Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Robbie Chess. I'm going into round 2 of the Doeberl Cup tournament I went in. Coming out of a round 1 loss, it was a bit hard to take. I started thinking, what am I doing here? This tournament's pretty hard. My first game was 4 hours, so I was pretty tired, ready for game number 2 starting at 7 p.m. Let's see how I went. This time I was the black pieces against Thogata Randheer. Let's see how I went. So, started off developing the knights and doing this player wants to bring both the bishops out to the long diagonals. So I decided if he's not going to take the center with his pawns, with either of his pawns, I'm taking the center with my pawn, claiming my stake. So I took 2 pawns in the center. I obviously can't play this pawn because he's got a knight and a bishop defending that square, so he's got good control of that square. So we castle, and he's playing the slow approach. He wants to play pawn up, knight up, rook over. Not sure if you guys are aware of the King's Indian attack, but it's in that sort of format, if you want to look that up. I'm just developing my pieces behind my pawns, taking advantage of the extra space. This is where I get my bishop out, so bishop's going to come out, probably a rook's going to come here, queen's going to come up to here or here, and bring my other rook in the center, and I've got good control in the center. So far, I've come out of the opening pretty good. The computer even says this is even, so not bad for black. This bishop does get chased around a little bit. This square might not have been the best square because later on when white does play an eventual e4 as he's intending to do, this bishop's going to have to move again, as you'll see. So rook e1, queen goes to c7. I would like to play the e5 move next. He's got 2 defenders of the square and I've now got 2 attackers of the square, so it's even, so I'm looking to play e5 next. But because of my bishop move was a bit sloppy, moving it back and forth, I've been just a few moves delayed. He actually gets in e4 first. So in hindsight, looking back at the game, instead of moving the bishop out, it might have been better to go something like queen c7 and say he decided to follow the same plan. Bang, I'm 1 move ahead. So then when he gets his e4 move in, I've already got e5 and I can decide whether I want to block the position up or maintain the center, defend my pawn like this way. So I played a little bit inaccurate, and now he gets e4 in while my bishop's on this square, which I then take, and now I've got an awkward question for this bishop. If I move it, I can't move it to here. If I move it there, you're looking at things like knight up, threatening the bishop, and then f4. If I move the bishop back to d7, let's get rid of these arrows. If I move the bishop to here, sorry, not that one. If I move the bishop to here, then he's got e5, and then this knight, ideally if e5 comes, this knight wants to go to this square, so the knight then has to go up to d5, which isn't ideal, and then he's got like things like c4, threatening my knight, my knight has to go back, and my knight gets kicked all the way over to the queen side. In the meantime, my opponent can then bring his knight behind his pawn and start a kingside attack with my knight offside, so I didn't want to do that, so unfortunately I had to move my bishop all the way back to the starting square, which makes me think, why did I move it to g4 and then to f5 and then back to c8? There's 3 moves wasted. I could have had a better position, so something to learn for next time. Now I was worried my opponent would push in with e5 here, and even though I said, for example, e5, I'd move my knight back, it's still a very dangerous position. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 attackers on this pawn, and he's only got 3 defenders. But that's a problem that's easily solved. You can either play queen to e2, defending it, or even entertain. I was even trying to calculate ideas such as e6. But I think I get it off ahead of this because I take the bishop, he takes the knight, and I've got, even though it's piece to piece, I can take the pawn if I want. And I've got his rook under attack, so when the rook moves I can just retreat, and I've won a pawn, and I've got this really good bishop on the dark squares, which is unopposed. So I didn't think he would play e6, so that's what I calculated, so I thought I'll go for it, but I thought queen e2 is pretty strong, with ideas of maybe defending the bishop first, or bringing the other rook over, knight either to c4 or knight to e4, and if I have to play a pawn up like this to stop any pushes, then the knight's got a really good square coming into here. So positionally I'd be in a very tough position. So I'm glad my opponent didn't play e5. He played a preparatory move, queen e2, planning e5, and I was like, I don't want any part of this e5, so I just immediately played e5 myself. I know it does block in this bishop, which is not good, but I just felt this e5 becomes too dangerous. I'd rather have an equal share of the center. It does, blunt this bishop a bit, and if this pawn got to move forward, it gives more room for his queen, his rook, his knight. So by playing e5 here, I've restricting the knight, restricting the queen, and restricting the rook. Now what's the rook doing here? It's just looking at its own pawn. It's not an open file. So I play that, and then he played knight c4 with an obvious attack on my e5 pawn. I've got two defenders. So I defend the pawn. I'm happy to just defend that. One thing I've gained out of this is this nice square here, because I've got the two pawns aiming there. I've got a nice hole on here, and because he's moved his queen to e2, when my knight jumps in, you're looking at it jumping in with a gain of tempo. It's attacking the queen at the same time. So this is part of my plan. My opponent saw the plan and played c3 to stop my knight jumping in. He was worried about that, such a powerful knight. Now, when I said I played e5, blocking my bishop in, c3 blocks my opponent's bishop in. So even though he stopped my knight, he's now made this bishop look silly as well. So we both have bishops that are not doing much. If you notice, this bishop too is also not doing much. It's blocked behind its pawn here, can't really move much. My bishop's got a little bit more room to move. It could probably come to this square here and put pressure on the knight. So I feel like it's still a balanced position. I don't feel like either of us have any advantage. It's a little bit symmetrical, with the only difference my bishop being on this diagonal instead of on this square on this diagonal, which I think I'm happy with that. But my opponent's rooks are connected and mine are not. So that's a disadvantage to me. So I would call this position balanced. I decided to expand on the queen side now that he's blocked his bishop in, thinking I could get some attack going over here. However, the computer doesn't really like this move. It chases the knight back, and it just leaves me a little bit too vulnerable because this bishop's not out. It's a little bit hard to defend this pawn, so I defended it with the a pawn. But you'll notice my opponent also has the same square that I had, that I was looking at, in reverse, except my pawn can't go backwards to defend it. So he's got a good hole, which he jumps in. Remember how I said this pawn blocks a bunch of pieces? So I don't want to take this, opening up here, and then all of a sudden this is going to come, and then this is coming, my pawn's falling, this knight's got to retreat somewhere silly. My whole center collapses. So that knight cannot be taken. Again, like how when I was going to get my knight in here and threaten his queen, his knight jumps in and threatens my queen. So he gets a free move, so I've got to move my queen. Where do I move my queen to? There's not too many squares. I've got to be careful. If I move my queen somewhere on a white square, he's got this fork coming. So I've got to be careful where I move it. I can't move it there because the knight goes there, so I can't move it there or there. I can't move it there. If I move it to either of these two squares, the next move you're going to get a rook over, threatening to jump with check and threaten my queen. So I didn't really want to move it there either. So I was faced with three possible squares, these three squares in the corner here. So where do I move my queen? I don't really want to move it to the back rank because then this rook is sort of stuck. I don't really want to move it to the white square because my bishop might want to come there at some point to then put pressure on the knight. So I decided also this pawn here is a little bit weak, so I decided I'll move my queen all the way to the edge. At least it defends a pawn. It's not very good having a queen on the edge. You'd rather have your queen in the middle, but I feel like I've made a few little inaccurate moves and now my opponent's starting to take a bit of an advantage having my queen offside here. So he centralizes the rook. That's a really good move. He's got full development. Like this bishop, yep, it could be improved either here or somewhere there or there. So he's got a few moves and he'll be in full position. My problems lie in, these knights are like pretty decent. The bishop could be improved. At the moment it can't move because I lose my knight. So the moment this bishop can't move, this bishop is stuck on the back rank. Where can I put it? If I move it somewhere like this, I'm opening myself up to a knight attack. If I move it that way, I'm then cutting my queen right into my queen is cut off from the rest of the board by my own pieces. I've got to worry about, if the bishop goes there, I've got to worry about knights jumping in here, forking my rooks. So that limits the position. So I've only got really one square where I can kind of move the bishop, which it doesn't do much on this square. You'll see it's this square. I move it here, so keeping my queen's control over c7. And it doesn't really do much. All it does is connect the rooks, which is part of the goal of chess. And I want to get my other. I was thinking get my other rook over and then bring my bishop back, and at least have my rooks joined like my opponent does to sort of get me out of trouble. My opponent has time to correct his bad bishop. Alright, so now here I was trying to think, what can I do? I felt like I was behind. I felt like he was going to get this bishop. Say if I played my move that I originally said, he was going to bring the bishop here, pinning. Now, if I try to move my queen away, he takes the pawn. If I don't move my queen away, the next move he's going to have, say I play bishop back like I said before, looks like a good position, b4 comes. It's pinned. I can't take the pawn because I lose my queen, I can't push it, and defending the pawn starts getting tricky. So I didn't want to let my opponent I'd have to retreat my knight or something. So I didn't want to let my opponent get such a dominating position where all my pieces are retreating and his pieces are moving forward. So I don't like playing a squashed, cramped position. So I decided what I should do. It's time to create a bit of chaos on the board. And instead of going defense mode, I'm like, I really want to get my knight to this square. I feel like if I get my knight to this square, it blocks the rook in. It stops when his bishop wants to come to e3. It blocks the diagonal. So I was like, look, I'm just gonna give up a pawn. I really just want this square. So I played b4 here, which is technically giving up a pawn. And you'll see my opponent didn't take the pawn. He takes a pawn much later, but you'll see how he doesn't take the pawn. So bishop to g5. Now I can't take the knight as before. I've got to move the knight somewhere. I can't move it many places. I've only got one square, which is over here. So I have to move it to the edge. My opponent takes the pawn. Now I could take it with a pawn or with a knight. Now my original plan, like I said, I was thinking to take with the pawn and bring the knight into here. Unfortunately, if I take with a pawn, my opponent's can threaten the queen, and the queen's got one or two squares, and then if I do try to bring the knight in here, he's just going to what would he do? So he tried to bring the rook over to here to take my knight. So the knight went in, he just goes to take, and then this pawn's going to be weak later. He's got threats of like rook coming down here, forking my pieces. Queen can jump over here, it's coming down here. So I didn't like this position at all. So I thought to myself, look, I'm happy to give up a pawn still, but I'll take it with the knight. Take it with the knight. One, I'm now threatening finally to get my bishop out to here. If I can get my bishop to this square, this bishop that's been doing nothing is going to be really good because it comes down here, this diagonal, and then it allows me to also bring my knight in, but defended by the bishop. So at least I get a strong piece in the center of his position, or my bishop could even come in, defended by the knight. So I was aiming to get at least some activity for my pieces. This actually loses a pawn. My opponent could have gone take, queen here. Now, forking these two pieces. So that's why I said I sacrificed a pawn. Now, I was thinking this is probably worth it because I could bring the bishop here. It's on an active square. Yeah, I lose a pawn. That's all good. But what I get is I get attack against the queen. I get a few moves for this pawn. Queen goes back. I can threaten the queen now. My rook's active again. My rook was doing nothing before. At least my rook's doing something. My queen's on a good diagonal. This bishop's attacking a pawn. I'm threatening to bring this up. And then if I can exchange off the pawns, he's got an extra pawn, but it's a weak pawn. A pawn that can be attacked. So I have some chances to try and draw this. Instead, he played queen d2 first, instead of swapping. I'm like, either he didn't see that he could win the pawn, or he mixed up the move order. Now, I'm like, I'm not giving you another chance to take a pawn. So I took off his strong knight in the center, and he took with the queen, which I'm happy about. My bishop now moves to this square now that the knight can't jump here. It moves here with a gain of tempo. The queen can't take either of the pawns. They're both defended, so the queen has to retreat. Now my bishop, which was looking silly on d7, is now at least doing something. It's attacking down this way. I've got plans to move the pawn up. I've got plans to move this one up too, swap off, and then my bishop's attacking, rook come over. So I've got plans now. At least I've got a chance. This knight's looking a little bit offside, but I've got a chance for counterplay, which is what I prefer. So now I came up with an idea how to rearrange my pieces. So this knight's looking silly and this bishop can't move. If the bishop moves, the knight takes the pawn. So I decided to, now that my bishop was covering this diagonal, you'll notice I didn't play this earlier, don't want any checks and stuff coming in. So I want to protect this diagonal, which I've done. Now I want to push the pawn up, make the bishop run away. Then I wanted to reroute my bishop this way because I want it to be defending, but I also want it to be ready on this diagonal so that when I push the pawn, it restricts these other pawns moving up. So I had a long-term plan of bringing my bishop here, then I'd bring my knight here, then I'd bring my bishop back, then I'd bring the knight there, a lot of arrows, then I'd bring the knight to here. That's where the knight wants to go, on that solid square. Then once I get up to there, I'm like looking at bringing my rooks behind, and then I'm pushing my pawn, or pushing this pawn. So I know there's a lot of arrows, it seems crazy, but that's my overall plan for the next, I don't know, 10, 15 moves. General idea on what I want to try and the setup I want to aim for. So bishop goes back, bishop goes down. Queen goes, attacks the pawn. The pawn's defended twice, I'm okay. Bring the knight back. I wanted to bring the knight back straight away to start getting it. It's defending two pieces, it's a bit closer to my king. You'll see, now he does his plan. He wants to bring the knight here to here. So I bring my bishop back, like I said, and now he saw my plan of knight to there to there. He played his knight up, and I played rook over first. I decided to swap a pair of rooks because I thought, let's just wait one move, because if I do the knight in first, without moving the rook over, he's one step ahead. He brings a knight in, attacks my bishop, attacks my rook. I can either give up this bishop for it, which is probably okay, but then he's got two bishops against the bishop and a knight. Yeah, my knight does get to a good square. It's probably still even. You know, he could take a pawn here if he wants to, but then his rook's probably going to get trapped. So I decided, look, I don't want to even give him any chance of knight coming in, so I decided to play the rook over first, stopping the knight, and then next move I'll play this. Because he obviously saw my knight jump coming in, and he decided he needs to now strike before my knight gets to the ideal square. So he played f4. Makes sense. You want to try and attack while your opponent's not quite coordinated. But if you look at this position compared to maybe 10 moves ago, at least my rooks are together, my bishops are together. Everything seems to be a lot better for me. For my opponent too, he's got two good bishops and a knight as well. So again, I feel like he's slightly ahead, maybe a move or two, but it's pretty even. I decided to take the pawn. Now this is a pawn sacrifice, but it leads to like a pretty forcing sequence. The computer doesn't like this again, me sacrificing my pawns. I have to learn to maybe hold on to my material instead of sacrificing, but I don't know why. It's fun to do. Bishop takes wasn't correct. He should have taken the rook. Apparently the only way to get an advantage is to take, and then take this pawn, would you believe? Threatening my rook and threatening the pawn. So then I move my knight to defend, and then he goes there. And then he's up. He's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I've got 4. So he's up a pawn, his queen's in a strong position, and he's getting ready to push in here, or perhaps bring the knight in. So this is how he could have gained an advantage, but the computer still says it's not even winning, it's just a slight advantage. Bishop takes f4 is more understandable, looking to play e5 and unleash this bishop, which has been doing nothing all game. So you can see my opponent's following a similar thought pattern to me. He's trying to improve his pieces, get them all working together. If he can push the pawn up, the knight can come in, the bishop can come in. He's just doing the same as what I'm doing, but in reverse. I played knight here. My opponents, after the game, told me, oh, he saw he could win a pawn. I knew that he would take this pawn, but I'll show you the forcing sequence. I sacrifice the pawn again. Computer seems to approve this time. Queen takes. Now my bishop springs out. Now the queen can't retreat that way. And it's only got, it can't go there, my knight. It's got not many squares. It's got literally got 1 square. His queen has to go to the edge of the board. So now I'll show you the forcing sequence. The queen goes to the edge of the board. Swap a pair of rooks. Knight takes bishop. Queen takes the knight. So I've got 2 bishops against a bishop and a knight. Now, one good thing to know when you're a pawn down, because my opponent has an extra pawn, you can aim for what's called opposite color bishop ending, which with queen and rook on the board is not necessarily a draw, but you'll see how this plays out. This is a good thing to learn for you guys when you're playing your moves. So I took his knight, making us have opposite colored bishops. But I get my bishop on a really good square on d4, anchored by a pawn. And it's coming into his position. So he moves his king. Notice that his bishop is actually hindered by his extra pawn. If this pawn wasn't there, he could also play bishop to d5 and it would be symmetrical, and he'd be checking my king, and my king would have to hide, and it would be even. So this pawn, even though it's extra, actually doesn't make his position better. The computer says this is exactly equal now. So I centralize my queen. I just think if he pushes the pawn, I just want to take it and go for a draw, because I felt like earlier I was behind. So he brings his rook to the open file. I threaten his queen, and I've decided to blockade this pawn. I'm worried about him, say I make a move like king up, or I don't know, like example like that. He can sacrifice this pawn, opening the bishop and then coordinating with a rook to bring a rook down and then win my queen. So I was worried about him pushing and either connecting with the rook or even checking, bringing the rook down, queen in. I just didn't want him to get activity, so I decided to blockade the pawn and keep his bishop trapped. Luckily for me, there's also a pawn here, so he can't even bring the bishop around into this diagonal. His bishop's actually really stuck. So I decided to play against that. Now that his rook left this file and went back to the center, I blocked his rook out. You can see I'm playing defense. King decided to go up this time. I thought if he moves up here, I figured out if he moves the pawn up, like I said before, threatening the rook down. Well, let's do it. I've got the counter attack here. So if he does try to bring the rook down, that bishop's pinned, so I can just take it. So that's why I decided that way. So he played rook to b6, threatening my pawn. I just matched his rook along the same thing. Happy to swap rooks. I'm happy for a draw. I lost my first game. I'm happy for a draw. I decided to bring my rook down to an attacking position and threaten. I was thinking something like this. I'll show you what I was thinking. I was thinking if he moves the queen down, threatening to win my queen, then I've got check, take, check. Where's he move? If he moves back in the corner, because he's only got this square and this square to choose from. If he goes in the corner, then I actually can win. Check. He's only got 1 square, and check, and he goes there, and checkmate. I actually win that position, even though I'm down material. If he goes to the center, then I've figured out that I could get a draw. Check. King's got to go only 1 square, and then I just go check. And if he goes back, I check again. If he goes the other way down the board, if he goes this way, I've always got check. And as long as I keep my queen on a light square, his king is actually blocked in by his on the white squares by those pieces, and on my bishop by those pieces. So he can't run this way. As you can see, I have a wall, and my queen will just keep checking him. So his queen's too far away to block. So that would have been a draw. So I played that in, knowing that he can't come down, and he played this move. At the time, he played it. I was like, yes, I can swap rooks now. I was looking for a draw. Always remember, there's always chances for a win. The computer says this is double question mark. Obviously, over the board, I didn't know that. And I just saw rook exchange, cool, swap off rooks, go for the draw, happy days. I actually missed that I can play a move like this, threatening his queen. I saw it as soon as I played. So what move I played was I took his rook, like I said. As soon as I took his rook, I was sitting there thinking, going, oh, you know what I could have done? You always see it in hindsight. Here. Now, where's he going to move his queen? His queen's running out because he goes queen here, for example. Now, I can take the pawn. He actually can't come down with any checks. He can't get his rook in. He's actually, I'm defended because of my queen and my king are in perfect spots. So I can snatch a pawn, making this a passed pawn. And then I can later go and do the same position and swap rooks. But you'll see with the rooks swapped off later, with this extra pawn here, it's winning. I get to a position where I swap it off, and you'll see it ends up, how it ends up. All right, now the rooks are off. The pressure's off me. The rook can try and win my queen. Now there's just a bishop and a queen can't win and a queen. So I know that if as long as I stay solid, I keep my bishop in front of the pawn, keep everything defended, queen defends this, queen defends this. This is weak, so my queen, I was thinking to move it here, defends everything. Bang, 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 bang. All defended. He can't checkmate me. Easy times. So I played, like I said, queen here. This also has the added benefit of attacking your pawn. He plays bishop back. I'm like, free pawn. Cool. Now we are back to 4 pawns each. But because the rooks are off, it's now again, if the rooks were on, his king is pretty weak. So I might have had a chance to win. But because I decided to swap rooks, this doesn't actually do much for me. So we swap queens, and I'm thinking, well, it's even. But imagine if this pawn was off right now. I would be in a much better position. I'd be trying to push this guy forward, and his bishop would have to hang back and defend, and then I could focus on then pushing like these guys forward. So this would be winning if this pawn wasn't here. Unfortunately, I didn't take the pawn earlier. So this part of the game is pretty boring. My opponent correctly identifies that this bishop is with a dark squared bishop and a rook pawn. If it's not the same color as the bishop, which this one isn't, this bishop's a dark bishop. A bishop and a rook pawn. If that's all, if I only had these two pieces left, this is a draw because I can't get the king out of the corner. So his job is to try and swap off as many of these pawns. If he swaps off those 3 pawns, even if he has to give up all his pieces, that's the draw, and you'll see what happens. So I let him play on a bit. I'm thinking I've got a pawn here. This is good. I can keep his king on the side, and I can go hunt this side. He played a tricky move. He played bishop back. Now I'd love to take the pawn. Yes, I got 2 pawns. Unfortunately for me, check, and he snatches my pawn back. And now I've only got this 1 pawn. And like I said, if he can swap the bishop for the pawn, it's a draw. So as soon as I move it, he's going to take it. So I really need to keep both those pawns on. So I move that back and forward. I move the other pawn up. He can give up this. It doesn't have any effect on the game. I get my king up. Now he's threatening to go this one up too, cementing the bishop in a triangle. Bishop defends both pawns. He won't touch any of these pieces, and all he does is king back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, draw. It's like these pieces don't exist. So I tried to like mix it up a bit. He checked me. I know it's a draw at this point. It's just a formality. So check, draw. Anyway, hope you guys like this game. It's a little bit longer than the other game, and we'll see what happens. So I'm 1 out of 2 games. I'm on half a point. So not looking good, but let's see if I can recover. See you guys next time.